The greatest challenge that society faces today and people with dementia face today is the public narrative of despair, that nothing can be done about this, and stigma. This presentation addresses despair and stigma with hope and the knowledge that people with dementia are still there. And it begins with hope. The two challenges to hope in the dementia world, the first is what I call the disastrous dyad. One of the first challenges we face is that most people believe that there is a care partner who has to give somebody else care. And they do that out of love. But what happens is that they get back burden. You give care, you get burden back. In fact, there's something called the burden scale, which is to measure the burden that is definitely going to come if one person has to take care of another person with dementia. So we have respite programs, and you can have the afternoon off, or you can have maybe a day or a week off, but you don't stop worrying. Just because there's a respite program doesn't mean the person stops worrying about the other person, and that leads inevitably to burnout. So no wonder people say, this is a terrible situation, I can't deal with it, I'm burning out. We know that people who care for others get sick more often, that have more problems in life than the person with dementia themselves. Why? Because, and there was a study done in Australia about this, people with a loved one in nursing care with dementia feel more shame and regret than people with loved ones in nursing homes for other reasons. Because till death do us part, the person isn't dead, the person doesn't have something that must put them in a nursing home. So as a result, this dyad disaster it leads to burnout. The second problem is a social problem. More people are afraid internationally on every survey of having dementia than they are of dying of cancer. So we throw dementia into the healthcare bucket and it raises the costs. But the real problem that all of this creates is a problem of stigma, that nobody wants to talk about dementia, nobody wants to say, oh, well, my mom has dementia, I've got to deal with this. It's still a stigmatized condition. So the goals of what we're talking about through the I'm Still Here approach and through our training is not only to keep people safe and healthy and functional, but to give people their own sense of self back, their own story. Because the stories that Candy just gave or told us of people who are already experiencing this are stories of the self, are stories of people who are still growing in their awareness of who they are. So the secret to this whole I'm Still Here approach is engagement. I call it engagement replacement treatment. And it's based on the fact that no one can really multitask. Say I. How many people here think they can multitask? We got I would say about oh my gosh, this is a third. So how many of you actually have earphones on when you drive once in a while and once in a while make a phone call? Yes. How many of you, with your hands raised, have ever missed the exit that you were going to? Right. Because we can't multitask. We can stay going straight, but to remember we have to turn off. When we are engaged in something important, when we are engaged in something we love, we can't also be engaged in anything else. Therefore, if it's true for us and it's true for dementia, engagement replaces those behaviors that all of us consider part of dementia. And what are the four? They are anxiety, agitation, apathy, and aggression. Those are the things that behaviors, those challenging behaviors that people associate with dementia. If you are engaged, if they are engaged, if people with dementia are engaged in something meaningful in their lives, they can't also be aggressive and agitated and apathetic and anxious. So we have a museums program, which I'm going to talk to you about very briefly, where we started at the Museum of Modern Art, we set it up at the Louvre, we've done it in Australia, and many, many museums around the country now have programs for people with dementia. When we were setting them up, when we were developing these programs, I would have care partners come and say, my husband has never sat for 45 minutes in the last 5 years. What do you mean? What is he doing here? And I said, he's never sat in front of a Monet or he's never sat in front of a Picasso and had somebody say, what do you think of this painting? So the 4 A's can go away if people are engaged. But there is a prerequisite. And the prerequisite is that the care partners, and the stories you just told, have to know, and all of us have to know, that the person with dementia is still there. It's the name of my book, but it's also a belief. And only when you see the kinds of things that Candy saw do you really believe that. And so I say it's a prerequisite because many of us are thinking, yeah, that's true, and I know, but I just heard a story this at lunch today of somebody who lives here at Jewish Home Life Communities and who did respond to music and who does respond to his niece when she comes to visit. So we have to know they're still there, and that's really the work that we have to do. So we have a public narrative that we have to choose to embrace or not embrace. The predominant public narrative around dementia is despair. It starts with a diagnosis, and people say, well, there's nothing to be done. What can I do about it? There's nothing to be done. But really, we can replace that with hope. A colleague of mine, Marshall Gantz at Harvard, says that if we find ourselves in an ambiguous situation, and dementia is a very ambiguous situation in all of our lives, those of us who have had teenagers know that having teenagers is also an ambiguous situation. I'm sure we can develop a lot. But if we approach our teenagers our dementias with despair, we go, well, this is never going to work out. Look at this kid. My kids actually did grow up and are vaguely normal and they're doing interesting things. But had I despaired when they were teenagers, I never would have gotten anywhere because despair leads to fear and anger and looking for a quick fix. And often that quick fix is a drug. However, if you have hope, which means you believe that something can get better, you know that you can do something to make things better, you become curious and you say, how can I do this? How can I get that person who's sitting next to me at bingo to actually take over? And then you become creative. You may say, I'm not very good at this bingo stuff. Could you do it better for me? Or you may say, I know you're really good at running activities or doing things or leading a group. Why don't you do that for me? So the care partner who got that woman to do bingo had to have curiosity and creativity, and also had to know that it wasn't going to work the first time. Maybe it'll take a little while. So curiosity and creativity and a slow campaign to improve things is what comes from hope. So the despair model looks like this. It begins with seeing the negative. You get a diagnosis. You say it's all downhill from here. Let's just worry about the future. It's all going to be bad, so why should I even try? Sadness takes over. Loneliness takes over. The 4 A's of Alzheimer's increase. Medication is increased. And essentially, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You say, nothing can be done, and thus you don't do anything. There is the hope model. The hope model goes the other direction. It doesn't mean you're happy. It doesn't say, oh, isn't this great? My husband has dementia. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is being in the present, is understanding that we are going to grieve for this terrible situation. But we're not going to let the grief dominate who we are. We are going to continue to see the person, appreciate those abilities, whether it be living in a residence like the one that we're talking about here, or whether it be living at home and continuing to go out and continuing to do things, but making them a bit simpler. There's less apathy, less anxiety, less aggression, less agitation. And the real goal of the hope model is that there's a better relationship. You have a better relationship with the person you love if you know that they can do things and if you stay involved. And the same with the care partners. The same with people who are doing this for a living. So hope, as I define it, is YCMAD. You can make a difference. That's what hope is in this situation. There are a lot of myths that go along with this despair model. And there are some hope truths that overcome them. And they're totally different. So depending on which of these public narratives you or we or society or the newspapers. And that's very important because the media that we read always starts off with Alzheimer's, the disease that robs you of yourself. Alzheimer's, that with all of these despair messages. And then there are the hope truths. So what are those despair myths? The first one is saying people with dementia can't remember. Well, we have something called procedural learning, which means we learn by doing. And so those things that we've learned by doing, we never forget. For example, being able to sign a signature, or not never forget, but forget very late in our lives with dementia, or being able to putt a golf ball, or being able to lift up the newspaper and at least look like we're reading it. So there's certain skills that we remember from the past, but also we know that you can embed new memories with people with dementia if you make them emotional, if you make them strong, if you make them clear. People with dementia still can remember. Another myth is that people with dementia can't pay attention. Well, as we've learned from our museum programs, if you put somebody in front of something that's interesting and you ask them an interesting question, they will focus for more than you know. So when you see people saying, my mother can't sit for more than 5 minutes, the question to ask is, what's going on in those 5 minutes that makes your mother bored that she gets up and walks away? Another thing that happens is that people assume that there's a connection between aggression and dementia. Many people come up to me when they say, what do you do? I say, I take care of people with Alzheimer's. They go, oh, well, that's really hard. But I take care of my mother. My mother isn't at the aggressive phase yet. There is no aggressive phase with dementia. There is something called the lack of impulse control. Part of the brain gets affected that if I get angry, I act out anger. If I feel sexual, I start to undress. If I feel some emotion, I will express that emotion. If I feel sad, I start to cry. The lack of controlling impulses does exist. But turning it into aggression, turning it into over-sexuality is part of the context. And it's part of what we can help people overcome by not putting them into situations where those impulses are needed. When I drive down the highway and somebody cuts me off and I really would like to press the gas and bump into them, I don't do it. But if I had dementia, I might. So let's not put people in a situation where they're driving down the highway and somebody might bump into them. Lose the identity, no self. Nobody ever loses their sense of self. They may forget a name. They may forget some experiences they've had. But when you introduce yourself to somebody and say, Uncle Joe, I'm your son John, I'm your nephew John, and I've spent a lot of time with you, and we love each other, and it's really nice to see you again. And Uncle Joe says, I guess I know who I am. We can give people a sense of self. The sense of self comes from other people. We provide other people in relationships to them the sense of self. So the sense of self doesn't go away, it's just harder to get to. We have to be creative, we have to be curious, so we can keep people in touch with who they are. They can't enjoy things. Why take them to the movies? Why go to museums? They're going to forget it. Well, first of all, I forget a lot of things. So I used to, when we used to go have movie stores that you used to go to get DVDs, which we don't have anymore because now we have Netflix. And I would go to the store, I'd say, oh, that looks like a great movie. And I'd walk back up the hill, and we'd put it on the TV, and we'd look at it, and after about a minute and a half, we said, we saw that a few months ago, didn't we? So, we forget things, but we don't forget them once we see them. We can enjoy things even if we forget the specifics. So people with dementia can enjoy things. Then they say, well, people with dementia, they can't decide because how can they make choices? Well, if you ask somebody with dementia, would you like to wear the green dress or would you like to wear the orange dress? And they go, well, I like the green dress. They've made a decision. If they can't make a decision, you say, well, you wore the green dress yesterday. Why don't we wear the orange dress today? And you help them get there eventually. When it comes to dining, we never assume we know what the person wants to eat. We never say, well, you've always liked the turkey sandwich, so here's your turkey sandwich. We always say, would you like the turkey sandwich, or would you like the roast beef sandwich? And we show them both. And even if they always choose the turkey sandwich, they feel respected and they feel dignified because they've made a choice. And so that's one part of our training. Everybody can make decisions. It's just important to not overcomplicate those decisions and to make them clear. I had somebody once in France where I actually teach as well, who said, my husband can't tell the difference between an orange and a grapefruit. And I said, what do you mean? She says, well, I say, would you like an orange or a grapefruit? And he says, I don't know. I said, did you ever? So I went in the kitchen, I took a grapefruit and I took an orange. I held them out to the guy. I said, which do you like better? He said, oh, I like oranges. I don't like grapefruit. We have to make them visual. There are ways to do all of these things. So the 7 hope truths are you can remember, they can focus. People with dementia have low impulse control, but it doesn't mean there's overly aggressiveness. There is a sense of self. People can enjoy, people can make decisions. And the most important one is this last one, which is the myth that people with dementia can't learn. We learn, all of us, in 2 ways. One is called episodic learning, and the other is called procedural learning. Episodic learning is what I was never good at in school, which is memorizing things like the presidents of the United States. I know that George Washington was the first one. I know there were a bunch of atoms in the middle, in the beginning, but that's about it. I do know that Lincoln was a president. He was important too. But I actually know the last few, I think. But I was very good at tennis. And I was very good at signing my name. I've become even better with the book. Because we learn from doing. It's called procedural learning. It's how you learn to ride a bike. It's how you learn to drive a car. It's how you learn to do probably all the writing you're doing right now and making notes. Because we've done them over and over. It's why you run behind your child, while they're riding the bike, and then you let go, and the child says, oh, I can ride the bike, and then falls over. But at least they've learned how to ride the bike procedurally. In dementia, we never lose the ability to learn procedurally, which means that if you do something over and over and over and over again with people with dementia, they will learn that. The second thing is that we are born with a real curiosity that never goes away. We're born with this hardwired ability to want to learn, to want to find out things. And that never goes away. So if we feed that with people with dementia, they will in fact learn and continue to be excited. Sources of hope are not hope itself. First of all, we have 100 billion neurons in our brain, which is the number of stars in our galaxy. It actually turns out to be the number of galaxies that we believe there are in the known universe. It's also Bill Gates' worth in dollar bills 12 years ago when I first tried to find it. And if we die at the end of our lives after 15 years with dementia and have only 60 billion cells left, it means that after 5 years we've had 90 billion. After 10 years we've had 80 billion. That's a lot of cells to work with. That's the source of hope. It's not the source of despair. The second is that we are born with hardwired, preset universal skills. Hardwired is when you open your computer, before you put a program into it, there's something called a motherboard with all these wires that are soldered together. Notice it's not called a fatherboard, it's called a motherboard, because that's what you're born with, the important stuff. And so what are we born with? We're born with neurotransmitters in our body that when we touch, when a baby is put on its mother's breast, immediately oxytocin, this connecting neurotransmitter, takes over, and there's a connection between the mother and the child. When I was born, they didn't know this, so I had to be cleaned up and stop crying and wrapped up, and eventually I was given to my mother. I don't know if it affected my long-term relationship. I'm not going to go into that, but I can assure you that we now know this to be a fact, and as a result of this, we not only put babies on their mother's breast right away, but when we take care of people with dementia, we touch a lot, we hold hands, we put our arms around people, because we know that touch is a hardwired skill that never gets lost. As is all of the arts, whether it's the visual arts, dance, music, poetry, all of these things are hardwired. Whether they come because music is thought to be pre-language and pre-words, I don't know, but we know that they're very deep in there. And you don't have to teach a child when there's music going on to move like this. You don't have to, when it's a sunny day and you're on the beach, to have even a baby enjoy themselves. So those are hardwired abilities. Another source of hope is Star Trek. So Scotty, he's the one on the upper left, had a machine called the transporter. And whenever Captain Kirk and all the other ones were down saving a planet, when it was just at the last moment, they'd say, beam me up, Scotty. And Scotty would do something with the transporter, and all of a sudden, they would be dispersed. Their atoms would be dispersed in space. And then they got put back together on the Enterprise. That's how memory works. But it doesn't actually work quite that way, because our memories don't come together that easily. Actually, when we put our experiences back together as memories, it's a creative act. And it doesn't always work out exactly as we thought it did. But we can beat the Scotty for our loved ones. We can say, I am going to help my uncle, I'm going to help my spouse, I'm going to help whoever it is who has dementia, beam up those memories. I'm going to show them photographs. I'm going to talk to them about experiences. I'm going to give them a hug, and they'll know who I am. So there's lots of ways to communicate with other people that can help them have the memories that are embedded in there. One of the ways is to draw on emotional memories. On the left was my first dance class, and that was Nancy Toby. I don't know if Nancy Toby knows about me or cares anymore, but that was a really important first dance, I can tell you. That was pretty important. And when my first son was born, you know, you don't forget those things, with dementia or without dementia. Show me those pictures in 10 years when I have advanced dementia. I will remember those experiences, especially if there's music for the first one and maybe some YouTube or Google tears, baby crying on the second one. We always remember emotional memories. They're deep-seated. Those are another way to help people have their memories. Another source of hope is the fact that our brains are wired to respond to space and to places. When we go into this room, there's something called the parahippocampal place area, which lights up in our brain when we go into a space like this. Get rid of the people, get rid of the chairs, get rid of me. The space will impact who you are. So the design of the built environment turns out to be an essential part of connecting to people and to connecting to people's brains and having them work. You can make a difference. YCMAD is the key understanding that gives us hope in this condition. And we can make a difference in everybody's lives, whether it be the person with dementia, whether it be in our own lives, whether it be in the caregiver's eyes, in the lives of all those affected. So there's 5 fundamental ways we now know how to make a difference in our own lives, whether it be we're 20 or 50 or 70 or 90. And the first 3 are exercise, diet, and sleep. Everybody knows about diet. It's antioxidants. It's sort of a modified Mediterranean diet. Exercise, all the research shows that exercise directly impacts our heart, directly impacts our bodies, and directly impacts our brain. I have been trying very hard to sleep enough. One of the interview programs that Candy mentioned I had is with a neuroscientist named Rudy Tanzi, a geneticist, and he has done some work that shows that if we don't sleep the 7, I'm going to say 6 to 7, he says 7 to 8 hours a night, it's like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So sleep is very important, and those of us who say, I don't need that much sleep, we're kidding ourselves. The 4th one is stress, is reducing stress. The first 3 and this one and the last one are important because stress leads directly to inflammation. Inflammation leads directly to turning mild cognitive impairment, MCI, into dementia and into all kinds of problems. So we now know that inflammation is a key that we have to deal with in all of our settings, and diet, exercise, sleep, and lowering stress are all impact inflammation. The 5th one is purpose and meaning. It seems like it's different than the others, but it's not. It's really what keeps us going. And that's the 5th element of engagement. It's the 5th element of making a difference in people's lives. What we have abandoned with people with dementia in residences, at home, all over, is their purpose and their meaning. And if we can get back to that, to help people run the bingo game, which gives someone purpose, or teach other people how to knit, or teach other people, or give lectures about, or talks about their trips around the world, or describing their photographs. There's lots of ways that people can have meaning in their lives, and it's vital that we see that as the fifth fundamental way of making a difference. The key to making a difference, to doing those things I just talked about, is engagement. We can make a difference in people's lives by engaging them. So what I'm going to do is show you a program that is what I call a hope program, a hopeful program called Learning for Life, which is one of the programs that we're developing here at Jewish Home Life Communities. And it's based on the knowledge that people with dementia can learn. It's based on the belief and knowledge that we have to give people purpose in their lives in order, and meaning in their lives in order to improve their quality of life. And so it is a hope program, and it is a learning community. So what is a learning community for people with dementia? The Learning for Life is not only a learning community, it is tailored to accommodate individual skills and interests. And the fact that they have memory challenges is not important. What is a learning community? A learning community is a group of students and teachers who together develop curricula with the learning experiences cooperatively and tailored to each individual. There are lots of learning communities. The Rhodes Scholar Program, have any of you heard about that? Which elders travel around the world, they go to museums, they decide where they're going to go, they decide what they're going to get out of it. There are no tests, but you come back and you've learned something. All Montessori schools are learning communities. They don't have grades necessarily, they have second, third, and fourth, fifth, sixth together. So some of the students are teaching each other, some are learning things. The students select to some degree what they learn. Hampshire College in Massachusetts, Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and Learning for Life. So Reed's teaching philosophy, this is how they describe their teaching philosophy, and it's one of the, it's a small school, but it has a very high reputation. It's characterized by close interaction between students and faculty in an atmosphere of shared scholarly concern and active learning. Now, you may think of this as a way out philosophy, but in truth, this is what we present to people with dementia and how they learn best. So what are some of the outcomes of Learning for Life? Some of the outcomes are a level of engagement, self-awareness. They define themselves as a Learning for Life scholar. They feel there is a place where they belong. They can be vulnerable, and they have a role that other people recognize. I'm going to the class. So this is how it works. In the morning, they meet and they have a conversation. First, they select and serve themselves breakfast snack, and they look through newspapers and find out interesting things to talk about, and the staff doesn't do anything. They fill out a form which says, do I want coffee, tea, or milk, and do I want cookies or no cookies, or whatever the form is. That form is a template. Everything at Learning for Life is template-driven. Nobody has to think of what's next because it's written down. You make a choice from what's there. They distribute themselves at what we call prepared learning stations. And the prepared learning environments, in a sense, are full-size templates. They don't have to figure out what am I doing. They go to one and all the information they need is there. This is taken directly from Montessori education. Namely, in Montessori schools, there are these prepared environments and prepared settings which the children then choose from, and as they play there, they learn more. They decided together they wanted to learn digital photography, so these are the templates. They decided they wanted to do still life photography, so the one on the right is this close-up of the dewdrops on the rose. Then they decided they were bored with doing close-up photography. They'd rather take a picture of the assistant director of learning. By the way, they put them up on the screen and discuss and critique each other's photography. Then there was a card creation center that people could go to. And all of this is set up in advance, and people have choices as to what they want to do. They then got bored with the card creation center and said they wanted to paint self-portraits. So the creativity is that the care partners, in this case the director of learning, has to figure out how to help 6 people do self-portraits. So off she goes, I don't know, to Walmart and picks up mirrors and paints, and this is the creativity that's needed. It may seem simple, but when some group of 6 people with dementia say, I want to now paint self-portraits, It takes some effort to figure out how we're going to do this. At the end of the morning, they share what they've done, they learn about each other, and they discuss the future. It's very important that in Learning for Life, we don't actually say, be in the present moment. They talk about what they're going to be doing next. One of the discussions had Mr. Wong, who often sat like this, answering the question, why do you always sit with your arms crossed and your eyes closed? And he said, I'm meditating. So he taught them how to meditate. And then they said, tell me more about your life. And he talked about his life and his family's Chinese restaurant. He talked about the fact that his favorite food was fried wontons. And so they said, would you teach us how to make fried wontons? So imagine being the director of learning, and now you have to figure out how am I going to respond to having a fried wonton class. So the first thing you do is buy all the ingredients, chopped up the onions. There was one woman there who had dementia but also had Parkinson's, and she picked up a knife, and somebody went to her and said, well, why are you cutting that with the knife? She said, I want to see if I can still do it. It was very moving. Then they decided that they couldn't only serve it to themselves because they had to be generous. One of the things that's hardwired in all of our brains is caring for other people and being generous. They set up a fried wonton making assembly line. And everybody can do a piece of that puzzle. It's very important to realize, for example, all of our art programs can be done by early stage, mid stage, and late stage people. We call them discovery, vitality, and serenity. Because if all you can do is take the little patties and put them on the plate, that's one thing. If you can wrap them up, that's another. They created the templates the night before. As you can see, everything's written down. Nobody has to remember. Nobody has to use part of the brain they can't use. They're just using their ability to follow the rules. That they couldn't just serve the fried wontons that they had just made. They had to have a taste test. Because if we don't like these wontons, we can't serve them to all the other people. They all tasted the wontons. The results of the voting were, Joe thought it was great, let's serve them. So Joe and the other guy, they said, well, she's always negative, let's not count her vote. But they outvoted her anyway, and it was like 2-1. So here they decided they're going to serve the wontons, which of course they did, and they served them to others. All of these were decisions they made. All of these were decisions that they participated in. The only thing they didn't do was make up the templates. Learning for Life is a place where they take care of each other and also others outside. So it's building on this hardwired caring. So Mr. Wong got sick and went to the hospital. What do you think they did as a group? What did they decide to do for Mr. Wong? Make cards, send him cards, that's right. What else? Wontons. And they decided to visit him. So walking into a hospital with 8 people with dementia to visit another person with dementia in the hospital is a wonderful experience, I got to tell you. So they were now no longer inside, they were outside, they were going to the hospital, they were doing what they were meant to do. It had meaning in their lives. And these are people, many of them are at the end of their lives. They look rather early, but many of these people were at the end of their lives. But they were brought back to life through this trip out. So not only do we do trips out to visit sick friends, we see the outside world and the community as a porous boundary between the inside and the outside world. We also see events in the community need to be dementia friendly, and we can't say it's only for people with dementia. We have a program, it's called It Takes a Village. It's how we get people out. And the basics are based on that procedural learning I told you, which is if you do something same day of the week, same time of day, and you do it every week, 6 to 7 weeks later, people will say, it's Tuesday, where are we going today? The second is we see being able to use the community and being out in the community as a human right. It's not something that we should say, oh, it's a special, isn't it wonderful, we're doing something special, we're taking you out in the community. There are so many public resources that are underutilized that we can take advantage of. And also, when you are in one of these places, someplace in the community, you are cued. It tells you how to behave. You don't act badly when you go into a restaurant if you're going to a restaurant and it's clearly a restaurant, or a movie theater, or a museum. So this is just some examples from where our Learning for Life program in Brookline, where we had the theater and the auto museum and the Arts Center, and a yoga studio, and the Historical Society. So we had not-for-profits, we had for-profits, and we had civic organizations. The Booksmith, where we had storytelling, Panera Bread, where we had coffee clutches, we had Brookline Music School. Sometimes they participated in the music, sometimes they just watched it or listened to it. The biggest problem that we found, and it's the biggest problem that that grows out of this stigma and grows out of this despair model, is that we couldn't get people to cross the threshold. It took us years before we would have 150 people coming to the movie theater. The first time we had a movie theater twice as big as this, and there were 7 people. It's hard to give a talk like this to 7, or to show movies to 7 people. But then we had 50, and then we got the media, some TV media, some radio, some printed media, and all of a sudden people said, I guess it's okay to cross over the threshold and participate. But those are all the invitations we had to hand out and send out and shove under doors just to get people to say, somebody with dementia can leave their home. Somebody with dementia can leave their assisted living or their memory care unit. That was the Jewish Community Housing for the Elderly in Boston, where we had that program. So the liveliness that you see, and you sort of take it, I take it for granted now that I've seen this all this time, is a liveliness that we have to bring to people with dementia, because they don't sit around saying, oh, I think I'd like to go to the park today. I think I'd like to go on the swan boat. I think I'd like to do this. That's what's missing. That's what our job is, to give them a life, to make a difference in their lives. So I'm going to end with a few, just some tables to show you the kinds of measures that we take, because it's not good enough just to do a good job. It's also important to measure and to do the research to find out that it's true. In fact, I have to owe this to Harley. Harley, when I visited you about 6 months ago, you said, all this is very fine, but what about that research? Don't we need more research as centers of excellence and as groups of centers of excellence? So we've now got all the centers of excellence, like Jewish Home Life Communities, involved in the research that we're doing. Now, this is quality of life. Dementia quality of life is higher with these programs. There's lower anxiety. There is less stigma. Hopefully, when you fill out your forms, we'll be able to determine that. Fewer falls per resident year. When people are engaged in doing things that are interesting, falls decline. Falls with broken hips are the most expensive medical procedure possible at that age. Higher engagement and positive affect. This is something called the Menorah Park Engagement Scale that we use. As part of our training for all the residents and all the care partners here, we also train them on doing this research so that all of this can be done. The one on the far left is the constructive engagement, and pleasure is on the right. And you see the distracted and the non-engagement is much lower. Higher quality of life. This is that book club that Candy spoke about. You can measure the quality of life by asking people and by asking their care partners. Less apathy with the book club, less depression, more verbal communication. Let's do that one for a minute. This one had to do with, did they say anything at all? And did they talk about other things than just the reading? This is a program called Scripted Improv that's been developed where the residents themselves are the improvisers. We provide the story, they improvise. You can make a difference in the lives of everybody around you with dementia, actually without dementia as well, and that should be giving you all and us all hope with this condition. Engagement is the key, and being engaged ourselves, but also engaging everybody with dementia and everybody we know who we care about in a way that gives them purpose and meaning in their lives, which will change us and them and build the relationship that we all want. So thank you. The takeaways I hope you embrace from this presentation are that hope lies in making a difference in people's lives, that stigma can be overcome by knowing that people with dementia are still here, and that engagement is the key to overcoming most of the problems that people with dementia face. So go out, engage, and make a difference.